Nazi propaganda is one of the most far-reaching and destructive systems of mass manipulation in history. By means of ideology, emotion, censorship, and the manipulation of emerging mass media technologies, the Nazi regime became an undisputed master in appropriating public consciousness and private complicity at an extraordinary scale while perpetrating what one participant called the horrors. An analysis of Nazi propaganda illustrates how tightly controlled information environments can lead to the collapse of critical thinking and permit widespread human rights abuses. The propaganda of the Nazi Party created an ideological base for their views. Using ideas like National Socialism, which joined extreme nationalism with pseudoscience on race and anti-Semitism, and absolute loyalty to the state, Adolf Hitler expressed many of these ideas in Mein Kampf, defining Jews, communists, and other minorities as existential enemies whose presence was the cause of Germany's defeat in World War I and resulting economic and political turmoil. Nazi propaganda was able to translate these abstract ideological assertions into emotionally compelling stories that could be easily comprehended and internalized by ordinary citizens. Complicated social and economic problems were simplified to malign internal enemies and false promises of national rebirth based on unity and obedience. Joseph Goebbels, head of the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda in 1933, institutionalized German state propaganda, which had effectively become part of a wider apparatus that featured the use of terror to maintain control. To Goebbels' propaganda wasn't about educating the public, it was about seizing control of every facet of culture and intellect. His ministry imposed stringent rules on newspapers, radio broadcasts, publishing houses, film studios, theaters, and music, as well as public art. Independent journalism was eliminated, and dissenting views were quashed by censorship, intimidation, and arrest. Through ubiquitous propaganda that echoed in the media, the Nazis cultivated a false impression of unanimous backing for their rule, one that deterred dissent and made even radical notions seem commonplace. You are watching the deadly fallout of Nazi propaganda, how millions were duped. Film became one of the most powerful propaganda weapons in the hands of the Third Reich. Triumph of the Will. 1935 Lenoy Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will continues to be considered a seminal work in political cinema. The movie portrayed the Nazi Party rally at Nuremberg as a magnificent and almost holy spectacle. Adolf Hitler as a messianic leader, the Nazi movement as Germany's destiny, it deployed all the cinematic tricks previously developed in ideological filmmaking like Sergei Eisenstein's The Battleship Potemkin, dramatic camera angles, music and mass choreography to induce awe and emotional submission. It was high-tech, but it was really a kind of mind control machine. Radio was also an important element of Nazi propaganda. Aware of its potential to rapidly reach a mass audience, the regime manufactured and spread cheap radios called Volksempfänger people, receiver to millions of homes. These radios were programmed to receive only state-sanctioned broadcasts, which meant that citizens would hear Nazi speeches, patriotic songs, and toxic radio shows. Radio created a feeling of intimacy and authority, turning propaganda into something personal and unquestionable. Listening to the broadcasts was a unifying, conforming experience that discouraged critical thinking. It was also sustained by print media and education, which served to bake propaganda into everyday life. Newspapers are continuously printing sensationalistic, false or skewed stories to justify any anti-Semitic laws already on the books, political repression, and territorial aggrandizement. Each teaching material was rewritten in line with Nazi ideology, and teachers were obliged to indoctrinate their students with racial theory and loyalty to the Führer. Youth organizations like the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls trained children in obedience, militarism, and racial purity through organized activities, rituals, and training. This way, it tried to secure the ideological long-term loyalty of its subjects. It was one of the great tragedies that could be traced to Nazi propaganda, the Holocaust. Jews were dehumanized in posters, movies, cartoons, and pseudo-scientific literature that depicted them as parasites or criminals, enemies of the Aryans who do not even rise to the level of beasts in the animal kingdom. This dehumanizing process served to dull public empathy and render state-sponsored violence more palatable on a psychological level. When mass deportations and extermination became policy, Many citizens were prepared to see these policies as justified, or even necessary, or at least inevitable. Fear was central to Nazi propaganda as an emotional motivator. The regime preyed on pervasive fears generated by Germany's defeat in World War I, the punitive terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and the economic ruins caused by the Great Depression. Propaganda painted the National Socialist Nazis as the only party able to return peace, honor, and security, while at the same time labeling minorities and political foes as dangerous enemies. This atmosphere was further stoked and solidified by the Gestapo and the concentration camp system, in which resistance was met with heavy punishment. Historians, documentaries, and educational institutes, among others major history elements within the media, have examined and revealed the progress of monitoring on Nazi propaganda after World War II. These studies underscore that propaganda works, not because individuals are stupid, but by preying on emotional susceptibility, social bonds, and limited access to information. Satirical portrayals in popular culture also show how propaganda methods can be recognized and mocked if their historical results are known. In sum, Nazi propaganda was not some superficial aspect of the Third Reich. It was an essential tool in exercising power. By means of complete control of media, emotional manipulation, ideological reductionism, and constant repetition, the Nazi state succeeded in manipulating millions and allowing an extraordinary level of violence. It is important to keep an eye on the lessons of this dark period in history and not forget that such old tricks exist in various forms and are used against our systems today. The deadly fallout of Nazi propaganda, how millions were duped,